So today we will be talking about mastering Angular directives, a comprehensive guide. So when it comes to directive or Angular application, it is must that you should be creating Angular directive or component or either way, right? So before getting to that, we must know that what is directive itself and how it is different from component and whatnot before mastering any concept, right? So I have a question here. Component is a directive or directive is a component. Which of the statement is true? First one, right? Okay. So let's dig a little bit and see how that is true, okay? So if you go here and see, if you open any component and try to click control and mouse, okay? So you will go to the definition TS file, right? And the first thing that you will observe is direct component extends directive API. Okay, that's cool. That means we can draw some diagram to understand it better. So we can say directive is a subset of component, right? That's why we said component is a directive, correct? And now we can conclude the last statement, which is component is a directive, correct? And while saying that, we can say it is a directive, but it is having a special kind of capability, the component guy. Okay, let's see. If we write side by side a statement of simple component versus directive, this is the minimal thing that you can write, correct? Okay. And if you go up further a bit and see the same diagram again, you will see the directive will have some set of properties that has been mentioned, right, in component or directive decorator. So directive has 7 to 9 properties. Same way, component has few, which is there are few, right? Now, what is the differentiating factor? Why component has so many property which is different than directives? Any guess? These two properties say something. Template and style URL. What they describe? Basically, they say component has a template or view. That's why now you try reading the properties from the top. Change detection. Why we need change detection in first place? Because binding update, how you want to update the binding. So that's why it is related to view. Same for view providers. Same for animation. View has elements, you have to animate them. So that's why component have the extra set of properties other than directive. Okay, so that's the major difference between component and directive. You can say component is a directive with template, correct? And directive is templateless. Okay, good. So we are okay to, we are good with the understanding of directive concept, right? Now let's get into the next thing, which is what is directive API? So when I say directive API, I am referring to what you write inside @decorator. Okay. So this is the set of fields. For better readability, I separated it from the slide, the code, and these are the properties that you are seeing here. Okay. So now coming into the mastering the directive thing, right? So generally we know from docs there are two kinds of directive: structural, attribute, and we don't know anything else. So before going to attribute, let's see what structural directive. A simple way to say structural directive is conditional rendering, whether to render something or not, and that star say a star before each directive. Okay, so these are the few directives provided by Angular framework itself. Hey, what is the rest? The rest is bit wider, right? The attribute directive, it is so big, like we cannot say what exactly it has, right? So what I did is I tried to create few directive types that can help us to understand the directive concept better way. So I say there could be one type called as composition, there could be one type of directive called as validation directive, event based directive, exportable directive, and extension directive, and there is one more helper. Okay, now you will see I am going to have new concept, right? How that can help you to master this concept. So to master it, I'm trying to have this thing. Everybody must have done match the following thing, right, in their academics, primary. What we do is, we try to map the left hand side thing to the right hand side. And there is a pattern, right? That's why we can say they are matching, right? Okay. So what we will do here, I will try to map the types of directive to the specific property from the decorator, so that you can get to understand which one to use when. Okay, so far so good. Okay, so out of this three, selector, JIT and standalone, this three thing is common one, so we are not going to check at that. Okay, so little bit about myself before moving ahead. I am Pankaj Parkar. I am Angular GD active and ex MVP, and you can follow me on Twitter or everywhere else with the handle Pankaj Parkar. So yeah, moving to the next part, structural directive. So to start with structural directive, we know that ngIf, ngFor, CDK scroll, virtual scroll for, and ng switch. Have any one of you created a custom directive for structural custom directive? Can you raise your hand, please? Okay, quite a few. Maybe most of the other people are saying, hey, everything is there, why we need to create a directive? So yeah, there is a use case for that. I will give you one, which maybe most of the people are using for. Have you heard of feature flag based development? Okay, so what we do in feature flag based development is, we try to have a development a development flow go, and basically you can check in or commit half-baked feature into your version system, and you still don't stop the current delivery. So what you do for that is, you basically have feature flags. By using them, you control your UI. So for example, after you see fast login disabled page and fast login enabled page. So basically, somehow we control the UI or feature, how we can ship it. To illustrate a little bit more, on UI what you can do is, you can either have ng if your feature flag is enabled, show a UI, otherwise don't. On TS side, you can have the same thing with if condition, execute a code if feature flag is enabled and otherwise not. So why ng if is not sufficient here? Because feature flag based development is not that simple. It may involve some user roles, access, or there could be many more things, right? If you try repeating that code inside ng if everywhere on your pages, it won't be going in a good direction in terms of maintainability, right? So a feature flag directive can be a good idea to go for that. Okay, I have the code. I will share in the if you want to know more about it, we can have a chat around that for feature flag directive. So let's move into the next part of the type of the directive, which is first type composition. Okay, composition directive. What I mean by that? Compose something, right? So basically we will gathering multiple directives and we will try to achieve some behavior. So when I say that, think about this thing. Suppose somebody told you, you have a specific requirement about creating a spatial menu for your application. So basically, what is the natively provided select option, which is select, right? If I want to do the same thing with my own menu in my own design system, I may have to create two components like the same way how HTML provide. Maybe one could be my mat menu and the options can be my menu item, right? So suppose I created a component called as my menu. And what I do is, it is very simple menu component. It has a template which say ng content, which means it project the content. And there will be one more component called as my menu item for option, okay. Again, it has same thing, template ng content. What is the special thing you see here? I use host directives and it has CDK menu. CDK is nothing but Angular component development toolkit. It already written some behaviors that you can utilize. So by using these two directives, I can build my component and ultimately I can achieve the same behavior by composing two directives together to have some behavior. So for example, I have my menu component, that is the first one, and then my menu item as the second one. And when the outputs, what it outputs is like on button click you can see the menu will be populated. And another interesting thing, because of CDK you can arrow up and down, it will automatically provide that behavior because that's a part of CDK. Okay, so that's one thing, which is composition type of directive, how that can be related. Like when it comes to composition kind of directive, compose multiple directive, you may use host directives directive API option. Okay, so same way, moving on to the next thing, which is validation. Okay, so validation, everybody do the validation on forms, right? So over here I created one directive for making a form validation, a phone number validator, which is very simple. Like it has a valid phone function. What it does is it takes control, check few validation stuff, either return null or not. And to bind that to the directive, we use something called as providers. And we try to do on line number 30. We are trying to provide ng validator token with the directive that I specify at the bottom, phone number validation directive. So what it does is, when you use a phone number validator on your template driven form, it will automatically trigger the validation. You can show the errors whatever you want at the bottom, like whether the field is valid or not because of this validation directive. So basically when it comes to validator kind of directive or validation directives, you must be elaborating the providers option, and maybe you will be mostly playing with the ng validators token. Okay, the next type is event based directive. So what happens here is, in event based directive, suppose I tell you like you have to create a directive on input field, it should restrict copy paste and whatnot. What you will do, a simple thing, right? You will put host listener on your element, which blocks, which take care of paste, copy and cut, and inside it is what it is doing, event.prevent default, right? Very simple. What could be the other way to write this? Any guess? Any other property from directive API you can use? Okay, good. So this can be a good learning for you. So you can use something called as host property on your directive, which is nothing but basically same as host listener. So you will see one similarity. What you are mentioning there, generally in Angular component binding, property binding, or the event binding, how you use that? Event binding with parenthesis, square with the property binding, right? So over here you done the same thing. You wrote one component, event in parenthesis directly, and you just wrote the function what you want to call. And for demonstration purpose, I added one more attribute, property binding, which is class you can use. Okay, so this is the one property for event based directive. You can use host property of the directive. Okay, moving ahead, exportable directives, the next type. So basically this kind of directive help to easily extract instance or template. What I mean by that, most of you have used template driven directives, right? We use ng model there, and when it comes to validation, what we do is line number 5, it basically say username ng model, and we use that ng model to say whether when it is a required error, please show this error, and on the next line we say the same thing, right? So this way it helps me. Okay, and why this is happening? I mean, were you curious to know why this is happening and why it doesn't happen with all other directives? Any guess? So basically there is some property called as export as. If you look at the Angular ng model component directive, you will see that the export as property is helping to export the variable. So basically what happens is, if you go back again on line number 5, on right hand side you wrote ng model, which is export as, and then left hand side you declare a template variable. So what it takes is, it takes the instance of ng model and put it inside a template variable. Now you are good to use that. So that's why you can use username.errors.whatever. Okay, so that was it. And the next thing is, but you know, without export as, how the life could be, right? So if I had to do that without export as, I have to use view children for getting the form access. So if you look at the following form, if I need to get access to ng form, I need to use view child. The first line should be ng model, okay, a view children thing. So basically, if you have multiple ng models on the page, see what will happen, you will have a query list. And how you can have a first, second, third ng model? You have to do access it by index, which is not good, right? So that's why the export as is the key for having your directive instance directly on template. Okay, I think last two types are left. So there is extension directive type. What does exactly it means? So in this case, I'm using mat table, okay, and mat table with some content, and at the bottom I have a paginator, okay. So the use case is, most of the time we use third-party directives. We don't have control over it. For example, AG grid or Kendo UI or anything. And to have some default value, we end up writing wrapper component because we want to define some defaults to them, okay. So you know, there could be other way. If you just want to have a defaults, you can use directive for that. What you can do is, in this case, what I want is, if you look at this line number 12 in the HTML, I have defined a page size option as a 5, 10, 2500, okay, and this mat table and mat paginator used along with each other on 20 different pages, okay, and I want to make sure each time the mat paginator should have some default options. So you can write a directive which will be very simple. You can mention the selector as a mat paginator, same as that of what it has, and then you have to inject one property at the constructor level, which is dependency injection. You get the paginator instance and then set it to whatever you want. Like I set it to 5, 10, 5, 10. So it will only show two options whenever you use mat paginator, unless you provide a explicit input to it. Isn't that good, like, rather than writing a wrapper directive, a wrapper component? Yeah, wrapper component is good in some cases where you want a layout around your AG grid or whatever you want to use, but you just want a defaults. Maybe this is the better way. So yeah, with latest Angular inject, it can look very simple. Like you can inject with self comma true rather than saying at self at the dependency level. And last type, which is helper directive. So I call them helper directive because they help you to do some work like utility functions or extract the values. So in this case, if you look at this specific function, or which is a very common functionality in our apps, there is a directive called as there is a component called as user details component. On button click, I want to print the content of user detail component, right? Can anybody tell me what will happen in this case? Like user details template variable, I pass that template variable as it is, user details, and print it. Will this code work? Any guess? Yes or no? Okay, so it won't work. So basically, why? Because when you directly write template variable, it gives you the instance of component. It won't give you the element ref of the element that you are looking for. So basically, you may have to do something like this. You have to create a view child, then you have to explicitly say read it as an element ref, and then you have to pass it to the print function. Then it will work. Okay, and think about this. You have to do this on 20 different pages because print is the very common functionality in the apps. Correct. So this is the helper directive that can help you. So basically you can define a directive which use export as, and along with that it uses something called as queries. So this uses a queries. I mean, I can give you the alternative for that. And I wrote a query for form view child ng form, and also it has a line number 9, it has a dependency which is very simple. It takes element ref dependency and take out the native element. And now you look at the line number 1 to 3 of this. Now what I am doing, I am using export as feature, getting the instance of whatever has been exported from the component, and then while printing I just say component dot DOM. Why DOM? Because I declare a property here on line number 9 which extracts the element ref. Okay, understood? Okay, so far what we have seen this all 6 type of directives, and we now try to play the same game which we discussed at the beginning. So basically composition directive type refers to host directives. Validation, they generally takes providers. Event based directives, they generally go for, you might have to go for host option to evaluate. Exportable directive, you will use export as option. Whenever you are dealing with extension directive kind of directive, you will be mostly overriding inputs and outputs. And helper, you will be mostly exploring queries that can be content child or view child. Okay, and one thing which I did not mention, how to use inputs and outputs on the directive. So basically it was similar like how we have used query. So I would give you a chance like to look at that API level code, which is very easy to read, so that's why I haven't covered into the talk. And I think with this note I am ending my talk, and I am saying that when it comes to directive, please try to see what kind of pattern your directive is matching, and then use this properties accordingly of the directive decorator to make your application better. And I hope this talk was informative, and if you are around, say hi to me, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Pankaj, for the amazing session, for the deep dive into Angular directives.